Einen schönen guten Tag. Mein Name ist Thomas Breitinger und ich bin der Büroleiter von Meyer-Vidorno in Deutschland. Wir sind bekannt als Dienstleister für Indien, wo wir 200 Mitarbeiter haben. Seit unserer Fusion mit Altios sind wir der führende Dienstleister für Internationalisierung mit 32 Büros in 22 Ländern weltweit. Unsere Kunden sind meist bereits weltweit aktiv mit 3, 4 Auslandsgesellschaften und einem Exportanteil von über 50%, also teilweise auch deutlich über 80%. Die Themen, die unsere Kunden umtreiben, sind also immer mehr, weniger Markteintritt, als dann eben, wie man den Marktanteil in einem Auslandsmarkt erhöhen kann, auf dem man bereits aktiv ist, mit einem Vertriebspartner oder auch einer eigenen Tochtergesellschaft. Jetzt durch die Übernahme einer bereits etablierten Gesellschaft erreicht man dieses Ziel schneller als mit organischem Wachstum, und diese Strategie ist eben durchaus auch für mittelständische Unternehmen interessant und zu meistern. Ich freue mich auf das Webinar und vorab noch was Organisatorisches. Sie sind alle stumm geschaltet und haben aber die Möglichkeit, Fragen zu stellen, indem Sie diese in den Chat schreiben. Den finden Sie in dem Bedienfeld rechts außen. Falls Sie eher individuelle Fragen haben, also die Sie jetzt nicht im Rahmen dieses Webinars stellen möchten, dann schreiben Sie uns gerne eine E-Mail und wir freuen uns darauf, Ihre Fragen zu beantworten. Das Webinar wird außerdem auch noch aufgezeichnet und auf Wunsch können wir Ihnen auch die Aufzeichnung im Nachgang zukommen lassen. Das Gleiche gilt natürlich für die Präsentation. Also melden Sie sich einfach und jetzt wünsche ich Ihnen erstmal einen schönen Event. And I switch now to English. And my colleagues in Paris, they will introduce themselves. Stage is all yours, Alexandre, Boris.
Hello everybody, ich freue mich, mit Ihnen heute über External Growth zu sprechen. Ich bin Boris Le Chevalier, co-founder of Altios International and president of the corporate finance department. And I let now Alexander present himself.
Guten Tag. Sorry, my German is not as fluent as my colleagues. Very happy to be here today. So I'm Alexandre Kaplan, head of the corporate finance team of the group. After 7 years in London in various M&A advisory firm, I quickly specialized myself in the buy-side aspect of an M&A deal, so advising groups in their international strategy and cross-border deals, and very happy to speak today on this very special topic alongside my colleagues.
Vielen Dank, Alexander. Next slide, please. So first of all, why M&A? Why M&A dedicated to small and medium-sized company? 20 years ago, when you heard about M&A, external growth, it was very much dedicated to large group. Whereas for the last 6-7 years, we noted that small company between 20, 30, 40, 50 million euros turnover, the executive committee starts to consider the opportunity of acquiring companies in USA, in Brazil, or in Asia, not only in Europe as well, in Eastern Europe, in Poland, or in Italy. And it became, especially during this COVID time, a very much appreciated way of developing your business worldwide. Why is that? Originally, 20 years ago, I would say, 15 years ago, most of the companies were considering export through a very traditional way of organization, like finding agents or distributors, meeting clients in exhibitions. And about 10 years ago, most of the companies were considering having subsidiaries in India or in Russia, having subsidiaries to be able to invoice locally, have their own team, but it is a long way to develop business if you want to have really access to your clients and benefit from the potential of the market you're considering. So we noted, as I said, since 5-6 years, for small and medium-sized company, more interest for external growth, which offers a lot of opportunities. It means through an acquisition, you can, first of all, save time. Instead of having a distributor, two distributors, you might be happy with them, not so happy, you don't really control them. Then you have a subsidiary, you have your own people dedicated to your business development, or maybe an industrial site. But then through acquisition, you can very rapidly have a local impact. And you consider local because you are Chinese in China, you're Brazilian in Brazil, and through acquisition, you can have a portfolio of clients, you can have a local signature because by acquisition, you acquire 10, 15, 20 years of local presence, which facilitates your business development. We might come back to these aspects, but since May 2020, during this sanitary crisis, we signed over 50 mandates for acquisition buy-side for European company buy-side mandates, whereas we had about 5 in 2019. So there is a great acceleration of this way of developing your business, and this is why today we would like with M+V to present you these opportunities and explain how to facilitate this strategy of acquisition, which is not anymore reserved to large group, but very much possible for small and medium-sized company. Alexander, I will let you now present, and if we can go to next slide, the best way to make an acquisition worldwide, in Europe or in Asia or in the American continent.
Thanks a lot, Boris. Hello again, everyone. So as disclosed on the slide, we have a distinct approach to M&A compared to other advisory firms. So we decided to be specialized in a very niche positioning. So the first distinction is the fact that we are working almost exclusively on the buy side, so meaning advising the buyer in its international strategy. Then we are active on the second point on what we call the small and mid-cap category, meaning we are working on deals with an enterprise value of 5 to 50 million euros approximately, even if we have a few projects going up to 100 million and others with values below 5 million euro. Just to give you a quick example, the latest deal we closed had an enterprise value of 2.2 million euros, so we can also go a bit below, but 80% of our pipeline is in this sweet spot. So our involvement goes from, of course, the market screening up to the closing, and we'll describe later the different steps. And the model is really to be the recurrent advisor on multiple deals in several countries for a buyer in its international strategy. So the idea really is to add value and to be, I would say, efficient when considering several countries in parallel. And maybe the latest points that really differentiate us is the fact that we exclusively work on cross-border deals. So we avoid working on a domestic market because the DNA of the group and the value we add is to bridge intercultural specificities. So our model also enables us to do the after acquisition, as we'll see a bit further, because it's a great news when you succeed in acquisition, but we'll see it's even better if you properly succeed also the integration. So we also assist on the post-acquisition support and the assistance with HR, accounting, and strategy. Now, if it's okay, we'll switch to the next slide where we will describe some of the key elements on the operational model of doing an acquisition abroad. What's the real added value on the field? Because of the DNA of the group, with a presence in more than 20 countries, the idea really is to have a unique advisor for several countries when a group wants to enter in several countries at the same time to assess really the market, the number of competitors, potential targets. Sometimes it's worth investigating several countries. and to have a plan, a pipeline to enable the growth. Then really, our presence in the country with local teams enables us to be impactful and to really have the knowledge and the specificities of a typical country. Typically, when you do a market screening, it's not only a database export. The idea really is to have an exhaustive list of relevant targets, and to reach this, you must have a strong network locally, a knowledge of all the different ways to find the ideal target. What is your ideal target? And compared to other M&A firms, working mainly with companies that have been groomed for a sale and prepared for a full, I would say, M&A process, we tend to approach companies that are not actively selling. So the idea is to really create the opportunity and test their willingness to discuss. And this is why we always approach companies by presenting a strategic partnership rather than a pure financial deal. So the idea again is to create value and to do a successful deal for both parties. Boris, don't know if you want to comment the integration part, maybe with the experience you have in Brazil a few years back on the field advice. Not sure we can hear you, Boris.
Sorry about that. We've been in Brazil for 20 years, and we've done a screening, and we find a target for pharmaceutical company in Brazil. It was about 30 million reais, which is about 10 million euros. And in fact, acquiring company is one thing. So you sign a check and you get you acquire the company, but then it starts really, because due to cultural differences, it might be difficult from Europe to manage the day-to-day acquisition. And then we come to that post M&A integration process, which is very important. So for the last 3 years, our CEO locally, who realized this acquisition for these UK companies, spend 2 days a month in the company, which avoids a lot of business trip for the CEO in Europe, and it facilitates the control of the finance. Even it can provide to the headquarters in Europe information about business, about the situation in Brazil, because you might have one lecture coming from the company you acquire. You have another lecture from Altios M+V, providing information about what's going on in Brazil. And I can assure you that especially last year 2020, it was very important for this European headquarters to have a feedback of what was the real situation in Brazil due to this COVID sanitary crisis. And due to the fact that we do as well within our subsidiaries accountancy, we can facilitate the comprehension of the fiscal aspects of the day-to-day accountancy of the companies. So just to summarize, making a screening and finding a company, signing a LOI and facilitating the acquisition is one thing. Executing the integration is another thing. There are a lot of cultural aspects. I spoke about Brazil, but that would be the same for Russia. It can be the same for USA, for Canada, Mexico, in Asia, China, or in India. So we can facilitate and be a bridge between the company you integrate and you.
Completely. We can switch to the next slide. The idea is to give you a quick reminder of the key steps of a usual full M&A buy-side process. So as you can see on the screen, first step is of course to define the ideal target. Then step 1, to do a market screening based on the defined criteria. So to identify at the best point possible the exhaustive list corresponding to your criteria. Based on this first list, you can then select the most relevant companies of the list to be approached. This is step 2. Then the ID on the approach companies, the one that has been open for a first discussion and interest to discuss. We will organize step 3, a first meeting, introduction between the client and the targets, and then from step 3 to step 4, this is all the negotiation phase, price negotiations, of course, discussion on synergies, structure of the deal, all that will set the basis of the letter of intent. And we hope that once this LOI is signed by both parties, we can go in the middle of step 4, which will be the due diligence phase. That is mandatory to assess that there is no, I would say, red flags, no high risks on several fields. It could be financial, fiscal, social, environmental, and legal aspects. So the idea is just to verify that the company is healthy, is clean, and that you can buy it without any risk, I would say. Then if all is okay between both parties, we can then go and draft the contract of the agreement. So it's called the SPA, up to the signing and we hope so the closing of the deal, end of step 4, if of course all the suspensive conditions have been cleared. And then step 5, as you can see, integration that we spoke earlier. Next step, next slide, please. The idea now is to enter a bit more deep in every step and to share some kind of practices and how to apprehend an M&A project, and first of all, how to begin. Let's see maybe some few first elements useful really to maximize this international project and why it's mandatory to prepare properly before launching any M&A project. So first of all, I think that it's important to name an internal M&A project manager in the company. It will be really the operational person that will interact with all the different parties, whether it's M&A advisors, auditors, lawyers, but also the internal people in the company. It can be the CEO, the investment fund, if existing, but there is really a need for a person that will allocate time for the project, and it's often this same person who's also involved in the integration process. Then it's a long process, in average 1 year, often up to 18 months. So it's really important to have an idea of the timing, as it requires time and energy, especially when you want to partner with a company abroad. For example, we recently advised a Belgian firm in its acquisition of a Spanish firm in the pet food sector. And 1 year after launching the project, it's still something ongoing, and we hope to finalize in a few months. Boris, you want to say something?
Just would like to add one thing about time. Time consideration is very important. You don't do an acquisition in the USA or in the UK, in Anglo-Saxon countries, like you do in Russia, in Brazil, or in India. It's obvious for everybody. It's very much cultural. And sometimes when you want to go too quick in the negotiation, you just destroy the confidence. So just saying that, you say between 1 year and 18 months. We've been in most of the countries between 20 and 30 years. We've been we've been in Australia for 30 years. We've been in Brazil for almost 20 years now. It's in India, M+V is for 25 years, and Russia 20 years. And from our experience, the respect you have to your with the people you're negotiating the acquisition is very much linked to the way they consider time, and this is a very important aspect which has to be considered. It's not you who decide the acceleration of the process of the negotiation. It's local culture and the people you have in front of you which are deciding the best way to do things. In Brazil, for instance, it might take 1 year to build the confidence just to know that you didn't meet the grandfather, and the grandfather at the end of the day, which you never met, you never talked to, is the one who will decide during a barbecue on Sunday for lunch, who will decide if the confidence is here and if you can continue or not. And it might take some time as well to really understand the figures, the financial aspect of the company, because in some countries, the P&L and the balance sheet you might have at the beginning is maybe not fully related to the reality due to local ways of doing business. So that is a very important aspect.
Completely. Then, so a long process, of course, it's also a complex process, so with a high number of barriers, especially abroad when you have to deal with cultural specificities, valuation differences, and sometimes the ideal target that you had in mind at the beginning simply don't exist, and in this case, we have to be flexible and creative. Doing an M&A deal, it's also defining why we want to do an acquisition. Is it to enter a new country? Is it to consolidate existing operations? Is it to buy a specific technology, a brand, a team, a specific accreditation? So it's really mandatory to define why we do the acquisition, and in terms of the ideal target, what is the ideal target? We hope it exists, but it's really important to have an idea of to where we can go in terms of activity, in terms of turnover. Are we looking for a profitable company with a specific EBITDA margin? How many people? All these questions, just to have a first view. Also on the structure of the deal, really important to have an idea, a first idea, of course. Is it 100% acquisition that we want? Is it better to be majority at closing and to keep the managers as minority owners for a transition period for a few years? Is it better to keep them for a very, very long time, which I always recommend at least for 2, 3, 5 years. All these first elements are important to solve before beginning the project and to assess, I would say, the flexibility of the criteria. For example, a quick example, we had a mandate for a French company active in the mystery shopping sector that wanted to have a majority ownership in a German company that they were, of course, used to work with, but the valuation difference, even after a few weeks of negotiation, was too important. The gap was too high. So we finally decided to enter as a minority shareholder at first, even if they wanted to be a majority and they insisted on this, but we convinced them to enter as a minority shareholder, and things are doing really well because the trust is here. It's a first step. The seller was not prepared to give away all the power. So all this kind of stuff really can make an impact. We can now switch to the next slide where we will go more deep on the screening and approach phase. Making, of course, a cross-border deal requires a high degree of knowledge, experience in the target country. So the first risk when we start is to be tempted to do the market screening too quickly. The idea is, of course, to be humble, and approaching too quickly a company can lead to losing time. So it's really worth taking the time to be as exhaustive as possible in order not to miss the ideal target. And this, of course, requires to have a network in place in the country, all the leverage to properly identify these companies that sometimes are not visible easily. For the duration, just to give you an idea, of course, it depends, but it's at least 2 months to do a proper search. It can go up to 4 or 5 months, depending on the market, on the sector, on the country. But it's not because you think that there are only 10 or 15 companies in the market that they are easy to find. Sometimes it takes even more time to identify, I would say, targets that are really in a niche market. So identification is, of course, the first thing. Then it's also important to qualify the targets properly. As you know, the financial information access varies from one country to another. In the UK, for example, companies tend to publish their accounts, whereas in Poland or Germany, it's harder to get the accounts for small companies. In France, most of the accounts are public. For non-listed companies, it's mandatory to publish annual accounts to the relevant entity if you don't want to have a fine. Same thing for the ownership. It's important to take the time to identify really who are the owners of the company, as we don't approach the same way as Boris mentioned earlier, a 25 years owner of a company or a more experienced manager of 80 years. So it's always important to identify who's behind the company, if there is an investment fund at the capital, is it a 3-generation family on board? So all this kind of information are relevant before entering the approach phase. And on this approach phase, there's really a need to align properly on the methodology. Do we approach on an anonymous basis or not? Do we approach with a formal letter or a formal and detailed email with a presentation like we usually do in Germany or Eastern Europe? Whereas in the UK, Spain or Italy, it's not surprising to approach owners on LinkedIn or to directly call the standard. So, for example, yesterday we approached 10 companies in Spain for a project in the fleet management sector. I mean, we got 6 answers in less than 2 hours. So four calls scheduled in 2 hours. So I mean, it's really a case-by-case basis. It depends on the country, the sector, the nature of the owners, but this needs to be processed. Really, what is mandatory is to create the feeling and to be cautious on the way we bring such an important topic. So it's not, I would say, recommended to ask a potential target their EBITDA level and the desired price after 2 minutes of conversation. And there's really a need to create, as we mentioned earlier, this positive atmosphere and the trust. And this goes by putting in place an NDA, for example, and sharing the industrial project with the synergies. Next step, please, we can say a few words on the valuations, negotiations aspect. So when talking about valuations, valuation multiples, maybe we can switch to the yeah, super. When talking about valuation, so you know, valuation multiples are very different depending on the country because, of course, of many things, but mainly the cultural specificities, the fiscal environment. So what really prevails here is to be cautious on the way we value a company. This goes, of course, through the proper analysis, I would say, of the adjusted EBITDA. In many European countries, I mean, you have what we call misuse of corporate assets. So the profit disclosed in the accounts will, in most cases, be quite similar to the true profit of the company. So less adjustments to make to the profit, like in other countries where you have to add back a lot of personal costs to reflect really the recurrent profitability. But I mean, there are still work and some analysis to do in the accounts to really get to this recurrent EBITDA that will reflect post-acquisition what will be the real profit for the company you are buying. For example, if the manager is paying himself a salary largely above market practice and that we aligned on another level after the acquisition, this gap, of course, has to be reintegrated. Don't forget to do the proper due diligence as well to verify that the company is healthy. And as mentioned, integration is key to maximize the value of your acquisition. So you will need to pursue and implement synergies in order to keep all the customers. You will also need to manage employees, the IT system, develop interactions between both entities. There is a need also to develop a feeling between both group after the acquisition on the middle management level. So one advice on this step: communicate. It's mandatory. It's always better to have too much communication than too little. And I mean, once you properly digested your first acquisition, you can then think about the second one. I mean, for the theory, I think we are quite okay. Thanks a lot for your attention. Maybe we can switch to the small case study just to share some small feedback on a case. So basically, we recently advised an Italian group in its acquisition of a French company. It's a group active in the IT consulting and financing sector. The idea basically really was to have a first step in France. So we started the market screening in April 2019, and we ended, as you can see, in October 2020. So small reference to the long process that it takes. It took almost 18 months in this case. So basically, we started in April. We made a first contact with the target in September 2019. After 3 months of negotiating, we arrived to a signed LOI end of the year, just before Christmas. After we started the due diligence that last for like 6 months because we discovered some risks that had to be apprehended, and then we sort out all the aspects of the SPA 3 months after, so in September 2020, where we signed the SPA, and we had a 1 month to digest some of the suspensive conditions, and we closed in October. So why did it take so long? Many reasons. First one is we had a listed Italian company, 250 million euro turnover. It's really a serial M&A acquirer. They were doing like 5 to 7 deals per year, and in front, we had a small French company below 10 million euro turnover, which had a first experience with M&A with a lot of emotion, and it was an owner that wanted to retire 3 years after. So we had to really explain him all the fiscal impact on his retirement basis. So it was a lot of communication pedagogy on this one. Above all this, the Italian group had some standards, like the GDPR compliance, whereas this small entity of less than 10 million euro has not the same level of standards on the GDPR. But as the group was listed, we had to align the standard of the GDPR, so it took us time. We had to mandate an expert on this. Same thing on the accounting compliance. There were a gap between a very structured group in terms of accounting and a more family business doing their accounting policy and accounting compliance. So again, we had to align on this and to have the same level of accuracy in the accounts and the same basis. So maybe a first conclusion on this case study: be patient, be creative, and be diplomat if you want to succeed. Sometimes it's hard to digest some of the requirements, but it's very recommended if you want to succeed. Boris, Thomas, not sure if you want to add something, but we can maybe switch to the Q&A session, if okay for you.
Just before we go to Q&A section, questions, sorry, there is one thing I'd like to precise. We're not a boutique, an M&A boutique. You have very specialized M&A boutique, but Altios M+V, we come from the business development. We have a DNA of business development, facilitating export, business development, local recruitment, incubation, accountancy, and so on. Our job is to facilitate your business development all over the world. Due to the fact that we've been for 20, 25, or 30 years in these countries, we have some knowledge, we got database for the screening, we got a capacity to make the bridge between you and these countries we've been talking about. And that makes us having a very special way of facilitating acquisition for small and medium-sized company, not only with a financial vision, but as well with a very much business-oriented way of facilitating your acquisition. I think this is very important, that it might facilitate your potential external growth in the coming months and years.
So I have some questions in the chat, which I will now translate. So on these 50 projects which are currently active, what would be the geographical split?
Half of them have been in USA, little bit Canada. So half of them is in USA, due to the fact that in USA you didn't have so much subsidies from the government or assistance. So I believe most of them have been for European companies, German, French, UK, Italian, in USA, because they anticipate obviously difficulties for local small and medium-sized company in the USA. So an opportunity to start discussion about when we're talking about acquisition, we're talking about potential acquisition, full acquisition, but it can be minority, or it can be as well business synergies to be developed, partnerships. So there's many ways of making locally acquisition or of full or minor participation. But most of them are there. Otherwise, it's been between, I would say, Poland, UK, Germany, France, and Italy. Most of the movements. So that's not that much in Asia. We had 2 in India, and I think 4 in China. China becomes again a destination very attractive, but it's been mostly in USA and in Europe, Western Europe.
Okay, so from the next question, I assume that that the company, so to say, the project is on hold, that there's a project ongoing. So our question is that now in this COVID situation, nobody can travel, you cannot enter Singapore and other countries. So to say, how to, or is it possible to do a deal digital? Is that something which is possible?
It's a good question. Maybe I can start because I've experienced a change of model with this COVID situation, and so we had to adapt, mainly due, Thomas, as you said, with the physical barriers between countries and our model of doing cross-border deals. Basically, we changed, of course, the way we worked, shifting to an M&A 2.0 model to adapt. Basically, on the identification part in the approach phase, to be honest, no change. This is something that you can, of course, do digitally, and with the remote working, it's working well. What really changed, in my opinion, was the physical meeting between the client and the target. We are used to run this physically. Now with Teams and all the digital tools, it's going really on a smooth basis. But to be honest, when it comes to hard negotiations, it's always better to meet. Bear in mind that I mean, for a seller, there's always a large level of emotion going on, especially when it's the first and last time you sell your business. So it's not buying bread every morning. So it's sometimes normal to see physically who is buying you, who are the guys, are there the right people for your employees that are with you for like 20 years. So I would say that due diligence and SPA all can be digital with all the relevant tools. So a closing, basically, if we take the big picture, 100% digital, in theory, yes, but in practical, hard to do if we want to do it well.
Okay. The next one was asked at the beginning, so I think you already replied pretty good to it, but still, the key factors to succeed with a deal abroad, in your opinion. I mean, having a good consultancy, obviously, but what are other key factors?
Definitely taking into account the cultural aspects. Of course, the proposal has to be financially appropriated and has to be the right one. But then to really facilitate your acquisition and the integration after acquisition, because signing the LOI or the closing is one thing, but it starts after that, the real acquisition, because you have a lot of HR differences, you have lots of management differences, you have to take into account the local reality, which in the countries we mentioned, there are fiscal aspects, there are so many aspects to be taken. So it takes time. So you have to consider the people you have in front of you and adapt yourself. And this is definitely the most important for the success 2-3 years after the acquisition.
Okay. You mentioned some case studies, Alexandre, already of the client which we supported. Still, the question there, what are the typical targets, so to say, of Altios clients? I guess we learned, okay, we are not a boutique, so there's a certain size, but this size then also reflects that it's mainly for sales and service hubs. That's just my interpretation of the question.
No, it's a good question. Basically, the typical target, I would say, is not groomed for a sale. It's a target that is that has sometimes not even thought of selling the company. So we have in front of us people that are not used to M&A process. So we must use pedagogy and not the usual speech. We have to adapt, and in order to bridge the gap and to really understand how they value the company, where they want to go, if it makes sense to partner with a larger group. But as you can see, I mean, on where we stand, the small and mid cap aspect, it's usually companies with a turnover below 50 million euros, sometimes very small companies. So this is basically the format, but sometimes we have entrepreneurs that sold previous businesses in the past, so that are used to it. So it's really a case-by-case basis, but most of them are unexperienced sellers. So we have to deal with it, but it's the strength of the model to have also local, I would say, offices and people knowing perfectly the country to apprehend really perfectly all the doubts, and to, I would say, take all the time necessary to answer all the questions.
From a field of activity, just one thing to add, Thomas, sorry for interrupting you. From a field of activity or sector activity, most of the projects in Asia or USA are very much linked to industry, automotive, aero business. In South America, in Mexico as well, very much automotive. In Brazil, we have a lot of projects related to health and cosmetic, pharmaceutical, and agro industry, agro business negotiation and so on. And in Asia it depends, but India and China is mostly industry as well.
Okay. And then we are already coming to the last question, at least for now. Yeah. Do your clients do more asset deals or share deals?
It's a good question as well. Maybe I can start answering. So basically, our clients mainly go for share deals, as they in most cases are not present in a country, so it's the first step going in this country. So they need to have a legal entity in place. So usually when you do an asset deal, it's relevant when you have an existing legal entity and you only transfer contracts, customers, some employees, a brand. But usually, and again, it's our angle, a share deal is often preferred in order to have this kind of big picture, to buy an existing company with all it contains, and to know exactly of what you are buying. And for us, I mean, it's really mandatory to know what you are buying, and with the share deals you have less surprises.
Okay, so this is it. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I want to thank you both. Yeah, I hope that everyone liked our webinar, and as said before, just get in contact with further questions, presentation, and the recording. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.